George Zimmermann murder trial, where on Friday, the prosecution wrapped up its case. The defense asked for the charges to be dismissed, and both the victim and the defendant's mothers presented emotional testimony. ABC's Matt Gutman has the latest from our Miami bureau. Good morning, Matt.
Hey, good morning, Dan. That's right. Both sides trying to use a lot of emotion here. That's because the central question in this trial and facing the jury is, what were George Zimmermann's intentions that night? Now, the prosecution spent 9 days trying to prove that Zimmerman shot Martin because he wanted to. Expect the defense to try to prove that he shot him because he had to.
This morning, George Zimmermann's case is finally in his attorney's hands. And the first witness the defense called Friday, his mother, Gladys. At question, the howls in this 911 call.
So you think he's yelling howls?
Yes.
And whose voice was that?
My son, George.
Moments later, rare emotion from Zimmerman, who claimed self-defense as his uncle also defended him. But it was another mother's testimony which captivated the courtroom Friday. Sabrina Fulton also asked about those 911 calls.
And who do you recognize that to be, ma'am?
Trayvon Benjamin Martin.
The grieving mother's testimony capping the prosecution's 9 days of sometimes jarring testimony.
These they always get away.
During which some of its own eyewitnesses seemed to weaken its case, including the eyewitness who saw Martin on top of Zimmerman that night.
And he was the one who was raining blows down on the person on the bottom, George Zimmermann, right?
That's what it looked like.
But perhaps no witness testimony more bizarre than that of the medical examiner.
I understand your question because nobody knows what Trayvon did after he was shot.
Excuse me.
And saying he changed his opinion on earlier statements he'd made. No sooner did the prosecution rest its case than the defense moved to throw it out.
What is before the court is an enormous amount of information that my client acted in necessary self-defense.
The prosecution ready with this quick rebuttal.
There are two people involved here. One of them's dead and one of them's a liar.
Now, the jury is not expected to hear George Zimmerman tell his side of the story. His attorney tells me it's very unlikely he's going to put him on the stand, which means that the defense could wrap its case by Wednesday. The jury could begin deliberations, Dan and Bianna, as early as Friday.
So many people wondering if Zimmerman will, in fact, take the stand. All right, Matt, our thanks to you. And we're lucky to have you here, Dan, with us because you've been following this case since the beginning. And you actually told me this morning that you think the prosecution's in trouble.
Yeah, the prosecution's case is now in. They've presented all of their evidence. And I do not see how a jury, as a legal matter, convicts of either second-degree murder or manslaughter. Now, that does not mean that George Zimmerman was justified. It doesn't mean that George Zimmerman was right. It means that when the prosecution has the burden to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt, meaning they have the responsibility to disprove self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt, it is hard to imagine that of all the witnesses we've seen, that there is not reasonable doubt as to that up to this point. This is just the prosecution's case. And even amongst those prosecution witnesses, we have seen testimony which it's hard to imagine would not be perceived as reasonable doubt in the minds of a jury. But you can't predict juries, so who knows?
That's right. And we're going to hear from the defense, as Matt said, next week. This could wrap as early as Wednesday or Thursday.
Yeah.